It was late, and exhaustion weighed heavy on me. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you when everyone else is asleep and the world outside has settled into stillness. I was barely awake as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth on autopilot, my reflection a blurry figure in the dim bathroom light. The fluorescent bulb above buzzed softly, flickering once before settling into its usual dull hum. I yawned, finishing up, and leaned over to spit into the sink, my mind drifting to the comfort of my bed just a few steps away. That's when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It was so quiet at first that I thought I might have imagined it, but it persisted, steady and patient, coming from somewhere behind me. I froze, toothbrush still in hand, and looked up at my reflection, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, each tap spaced out with unnatural precision, like the ticking of some dark, invisible clock. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the old pipes, or maybe a tree branch brushing against the window. But the hairs on the back of my neck prickled, my senses sharpening in the heavy silence. I stood there, listening, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. That's when I heard it, a whisper, soft and distorted, coming from somewhere just behind me. "Don't, turn around." The voice was wrong. It was mine, but it wasn't. The words were twisted, stretched, as if someone or something was imitating me, struggling to match the tone and cadence of my voice. I couldn't move, every muscle locked in place as I stared at my own face in the mirror, feeling a chill crawl down my spine. Slowly, my reflection began to change. At first, I thought it was my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But then I saw it. The corners of my reflection's mouth started to curl upward, slowly stretching into a wide, unnatural grin. My own face remained expressionless, frozen in shock, but my reflection's eyes sparkled with something dark, something almost amused. The grin grew wider, unnatural, stretching far beyond what should have been possible, lips parting to reveal sharp, jagged teeth that glinted in the dim light. I didn't have teeth like that. I didn't have a smile like that. "Don't turn around," it whispered again, its voice now dripping with a twisted sort of glee. I couldn't look away, trapped in that horrific, leering gaze. My mind screamed at me to turn, to bolt out of the bathroom, but some invisible force held me there, compelling me to keep staring, as if breaking eye contact would unleash something even worse. And then, slowly, almost mockingly, my reflection raised a hand, mirroring my own, fingers stretching toward the mirror. Its skin was pale, almost sickly, and the fingernails were long, dark, curving like claws. My own hand stayed frozen at my side, clenched in a fist, but my reflection's fingers continued their slow crawl toward the glass, pressing against it, nails scraping lightly across the surface. A low chuckle bubbled up from my reflection's throat, a sound that was both foreign and familiar, warping the edges of my sanity. What do you want?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely more than a whisper. Its grin widened further, almost splitting its face in two. The teeth in its mouth gleamed, jagged and uneven, each one a dagger that glistened with some dark, wet substance. And then it spoke, its tone sweet, taunting. "I want to come out." The words slithered into my mind, curling around my thoughts, sending shock waves of fear through me. I fought against the invisible force holding me in place, my body trembling with the effort. The reflection pressed its face closer to the mirror, as if testing the boundaries between us, its eyes gleaming with malevolent anticipation. "Don't you get lonely all alone at night?" it crooned. "I could keep you company. We could trade places." "No," I whispered, my voice shaking. You're not real." "Oh, but I am," it replied, its voice dropping to a mocking hiss. "I'm the real you, the one that lurks beneath, waiting to be let out. Don't pretend you haven't felt me." It was then that I noticed something else, something that shattered the last remnants of my composure. As I stared into its eyes, I saw a faint, blurry figure standing in the shadows behind me in the reflection, just out of sight. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to turn, but the presence in the mirror grew stronger, closer, its distorted form towering just behind my reflection, its face hidden in shadow. "Look at us," the reflection whispered, its grin now grotesque, stretching from ear to ear. "We're not alone after all," I gasped, instinctively raising a hand to shield myself, and that's when it happened. My reflection's hand shot out of the mirror, gripping my wrist with impossible force, its nails biting into my skin. The sensation was cold, like touching ice, but it burned at the same time, an unnatural chill seeping into my bones. I tried to scream, but no sound came out as it pulled me closer to the mirror, its grip tightening. My vision swam as I was drawn closer to that ghastly face, those predatory eyes inches from mine, its breath sour and hot against my skin. "You can't hide from me," it snarled, its voice dropping to a guttural growl. "I am you." With a final surge of strength, I yanked my arm free, stumbling backward and crashing into the bathroom door. The mirror cracked, spiderwebbing from where its hand had pressed against the glass, but the reflection remained, its face distorted by the fractures, twisted into a look of pure, unadulterated rage. The reflection began to laugh, the sound echoing in my head, louder and louder, until it was all I could hear. I scrambled out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and backing away, panting, clutching my arm where it had gripped me. For a few seconds I stood in silence, my heart thundering in my chest, half expecting the door to fly open. But the laughter had stopped. The house was silent again. My arm throbbed where it had grabbed me, a dark bruise forming in the shape of its fingers. Trembling, I took a step back, staring at the bathroom door, dread pooling in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't stay in the house. I had to leave, to get away from that thing in the mirror. But as I turned to grab my keys from the table, I froze. There, in the hallway mirror by the front door, was my reflection, smiling. My heart sank as I realized it wasn't mirroring my own horrified expression. It was grinning that same jagged, twisted smile, lips parted to reveal those sharp, monstrous teeth. Then slowly, it raised a hand, pointing to me. "Where are you going?" it whispered, its voice soft, menacing. "We're not finished yet." As I backed away, I felt the walls close in, the house seeming to pulse with a dark, suffocating energy, and in every reflective surface, every glint of glass, that terrible grin watched me, waiting, as if daring me to make the next move. I turned and fled, leaving my home behind, the sinister echo of its laughter following me long into the night. Even now, I can't bring myself to look in mirrors. Because I know, no matter where I go, it's there, waiting, and someday it will find a way out. There's something about watching horror movies alone that's both thrilling and unsettling. The late hour, the isolation. It amplifies every creak and shadow in my small apartment. It was nearly midnight, and I'd settled into my couch, the glow from the TV casting flickering shapes across the walls. A classic slasher flick was playing, complete with creepy music and a killer lurking just out of sight. I could feel the tension mounting as the protagonist crept through a darkened house on screen, her breathing shallow, every footstep echoing. I was so absorbed in the movie that at first I didn't notice the sound. I thought it was part of the film. The slow, deliberate sound of footsteps, one after another, heavy and unmistakable. But as I focused, I realized they weren't coming from the speakers. The footsteps were coming from the hallway outside my apartment door. I muted the TV and the apartment plunged into silence, broken only by the relentless sound of those slow, dragging footsteps. I listened, trying to make sense of it, feeling the hairs on my arms rise. They were unmistakably real, echoing down the hallway, moving steadily closer. I told myself it was probably just one of the neighbors, maybe coming home late or pacing back and forth. I live in an older building, and the walls are thin. You can hear almost everything in the hallway. But something about the rhythm of those steps was off. They were too slow, too heavy, each one landing with a faint thud, followed by a pause, like someone was limping or dragging their feet. Then they stopped, just outside my door. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't dare move, straining to hear anything beyond the thick silence that filled my apartment. And then I heard it. A slow, rasping breath. The sound was thick and wet, as if the person outside was struggling to inhale. Each breath came in shuddering gasps, rattling like air forced through broken glass. I waited, paralyzed, expecting a knock. But it never came. The breathing continued, heavy and labored, inches away from where I sat on the other side of the door. My fingers curled into the couch cushions, nails digging into the fabric as I fought the urge to get up and check. But something inside me knew. I didn't want to look. Just when I thought I couldn't take another second of that horrible breathing, I saw the door handle start to turn. One quiet click at a time. Panic seized me. I didn't remember locking the door when I got home, and now I couldn't recall if I'd even checked. The handle twisted slowly, almost lazily, as if whatever was on the other side was savoring every second. My pulse pounded in my ears as I watched the handle turn, centimeter by centimeter. I thought about shouting, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was watch, helpless, as the handle continued to rotate, finally reaching the point where the latch would click open. But then, just as it seemed like the door would swing inward, the handle stopped. Silence. The footsteps resumed, moving away from my door, slow and steady. I let out a shaky breath, daring to hope that whoever or whatever was outside had lost interest. But then I heard a noise that made my blood run cold. The faint, metallic click of a key sliding into the lock. My heart nearly stopped. I don't live with anyone. No one else should have a key to my apartment. I pressed myself against the couch, my mind racing. There was no way out. My apartment was a small studio with one door and no fire escape. Whoever was outside was about to let themselves in, and I was trapped. The key turned with a quiet, deliberate scrape. The sound was excruciatingly slow, every metallic twist echoing in the silence. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping that somehow this was all a nightmare, that I'd wake up safe and sound. But when I opened my eyes, the door was inching open. A sliver of darkness appeared, widening as the door swung inward. At first, I couldn't see anything beyond the blackness, but then a figure stepped forward, filling the doorway. The person, if it even was a person, was tall and hunched, their form shrouded in a long, tattered coat that seemed to absorb the light. Their face was obscured, hidden beneath a hood, but I could see the outline of their jaw, sharp and unnatural, like bones pressing against paper-thin skin. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, half in, half out of the doorway, head tilted as if studying me. My mind screamed at me to do something, to run, to scream, to grab something to defend myself, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away. Then, as if sensing my fear, the figure stepped inside, one slow, shuffling step after another. I finally managed to scramble off the couch, backing away until I hit the wall, my hands groping for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes darted around the room, landing on a small metal lamp by my bed. It wasn't much, but it was something. I grabbed the lamp, clutching it in front of me like a lifeline. The figure paused, its head tilting again, as if amused. Then it moved closer, and I caught a glimpse of its face, or what was left of it. Skin stretched taut over hollowed cheeks, and the mouth was twisted into an unnatural grin, the teeth far too sharp, too jagged like splinters of bone. The figure raised a hand, bony fingers stretching toward me, and I swung the lamp, aiming for its head. But the figure moved with impossible speed, sidestepping my attack and closing the distance between us in a heartbeat. A cold, clammy hand wrapped around my wrist, pinning me in place. I struggled, trying to pull free, but its grip was like iron, unyielding. The creature leaned in close, its breath hot and foul, reeking of decay. "Don't leave," it whispered, its voice barely more than a guttural rasp. "I've come so far, just to be near you." I twisted, jerking my arm back with all my strength, and finally broke free. Without thinking, I dashed for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back as I bolted down the hallway, my only thought to escape, to get as far away from that thing as possible. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for breath under the streetlights. I glanced back at my building, half expecting to see that figure watching me from the window, but there was nothing there. The lights in my apartment were still on, the door hanging open like a gaping wound. I went to a friend's place that night, too shaken to return. When I finally mustered the courage to go back the next day, the door was closed, locked just as I'd left it. But as I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. There, on the floor, was my key, the spare key that I kept hidden in a drawer by the door. It was lying in the center of the room, glinting faintly in the daylight, as though someone had taken it out and placed it there deliberately. And there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. Just beside the key, scrawled in what looked like ash or soot, was a single word: soon. I didn't stay in that apartment long after that. Even now, years later, every time I hear footsteps in a quiet hallway, my heart skips a beat, and I can't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure, watching, waiting, and perhaps coming back for me. I was dead on my feet by the time I made it home. The city seemed darker than usual, the street lamps casting only a dull glow as I trudged up the steps to our front door. All I could think about was sinking into bed beside my wife, Lena, who would already be asleep by now. The warmth of her beside me, her familiar presence in the silence of our home, these were the things that kept me going after such a grueling day. I slipped into the bedroom quietly, not wanting to disturb her. In the dim light seeping through the cracked door, I could make out her shape under the blankets. She was lying on her side, her back to me, breathing softly, her hair spilling over the pillow. I exhaled in relief, kicked off my shoes, and changed into an old shirt and sweatpants. Every movement felt heavy, like wading through water. I could hardly keep my eyes open. Sliding under the covers, I felt the comforting warmth radiate from her. And for a moment, I let myself relax, the day's weight lifting slightly. I draped an arm over her side, and as my eyes finally drifted shut, I thought I caught a faint, strange smell. It was earthy, stale, like old leaves and damp soil. But then it faded, replaced by the familiar scent of our bedroom. I was almost asleep when I heard it, a soft, barely there rustling sound coming from the hallway. At first, I thought I was imagining it, just the remnants of an exhausted mind finally unwinding. But the noise grew louder, an irregular shuffle that seemed to hesitate just outside our door. Every muscle in my body tensed. I opened my eyes, peering at the sliver of hallway visible through the door's crack. The shadows seemed to shift, as if something was moving just out of sight. I carefully withdrew my arm from around Lena, barely daring to breathe, and slid out of bed. The floor creaked under my feet, loud enough that I winced, glancing over to make sure I hadn't woken her. She didn't stir. I stepped into the hallway, holding my breath, the hair on my arms prickling. The rustling grew louder, clearer. It was coming from the direction of the bathroom, which was just down the hall. My stomach twisted. I was alone in the dark, my own home feeling suddenly unfamiliar, oppressive. The bathroom door creaked open, and out stumbled a figure. Disoriented, blinking in the low light, it was Lena. She looked exhausted, her eyes half closed as though she'd just woken up. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. Lena was here. But then, who was in our bed? I felt a rush of cold terror as Lena looked up at me, her face a mask of confusion mirroring my own. "Did I fall asleep in the bathroom?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. I shook my head, unable to find words, and then we both turned, looking down the hall into the bedroom. The dim light revealed the bed, my side unmade where I'd gotten up, and beside it, Lena's side. An empty indentation lay there, a hollow in the mattress where something had been lying beside me only moments before. The sheets were pulled back, rumpled as though recently occupied, but the bed was empty. The silence stretched, thick and stifling. Lena moved a step closer to me, clutching her robe tightly around herself. I could see the same creeping realization dawning on her face as she stared at that empty space in the bed. Something had been lying there, something that was not my wife. In that moment, I became acutely aware of the earthy smell again, stronger now, emanating from the bed. The odor was thicker, rancid, like rotting leaves mixed with something metallic, a coppery tang that made my stomach churn. What was lying next to you?" Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. Every rational thought was fleeing my mind, leaving only primal fear. I took her hand, gripping it tightly, and backed us away from the bedroom door. Just as we crossed the threshold, the door creaked shut on its own. We stood frozen in the hallway, staring at it, until another sound reached us, a soft, dragging whisper coming from the other side of the door. It was a sound that sent chills up my spine, like nails scraping against old wood, but muffled, distant. I couldn't help it. I leaned in, pressing my ear against the wood. The whisper became clearer, almost like words spoken in a foreign tongue, guttural and wet, slithering into my mind like poison. I jerked back, clutching my ears, my head pounding. "We need to leave," Lena said, her voice filled with a panic that mirrored my own. "Now." We didn't wait to gather anything. I grabbed my car keys from the entry table, and we rushed out into the cold night, barely pausing to lock the door behind us. My hands shook as I fumbled with the car's ignition, casting one last glance back at the house. Through the bedroom window I saw it, a shadow standing by the bed, its form vague and shifting, as though it were made of smoke and shadows, watching us leave. I pressed my foot on the gas, pulling out of the driveway, my heart thundering in my chest. We drove in silence, the road stretching endlessly ahead, streetlights casting fleeting shadows across Lena's pale face. What was that thing?" she finally whispered. I didn't answer because I didn't know. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been lying next to me, nestled under my arm, had somehow found a way into our lives, had come uninvited into our home and made itself comfortable in our bed. We ended up at a motel miles away, the kind of place we'd usually avoid, but it felt safe just because it wasn't home. Lena fell asleep fitfully, her face twisted in discomfort, and I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the night replaying in my mind. Eventually I dozed off, the tension finally easing as dawn approached. When I opened my eyes, groggy and exhausted, Lena was already awake, staring at me with an expression of horror. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She lifted a trembling hand, and my stomach dropped when I saw what she held. It was a single, long black hair, not hers, and certainly not mine. It was tangled around her fingers like a cruel reminder, a trace left behind by something that had no place in our world, something that had shared our bed. And as I watched in dawning horror, I felt it again, that earthy, decaying smell creeping in, filling the small motel room, as though it had followed us, or worse, as though it had never really left.